We live in a world that worships exhaustion. From the moment you wake up, you are told that if you are not grinding, you are falling behind. If you are not pushing harder, someone else is overtaking you. If you are not obsessed with the outcome, you must not want it badly enough. Hustle culture has turned ambition into anxiety and discipline into self-punishment. And somewhere along the way, we started believing that tension equals progress. But let me ask you something quietly, honestly. Has gripping your goals tighter actually brought them closer, or has it only made you more tired? The modern world equates effort with force. We are taught to chase, to compete, to strain against reality, as if life is something that must be wrestled into submission. But the ancient Stoics saw something most people still miss. They understood that frantic action is often fear in disguise. It looks productive, it feels intense, but underneath it, there is usually desperation. And desperation repels what calm confidence attracts. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, wrote in his private reflections, "Confine yourself to the present." He ruled armies, faced plagues, endured betrayal, yet he did not preach panic. He practiced composure. Think about water. Water does not attack the rock. It does not scream at the mountain. It flows, it adapts, it persists, and over time, it reshapes landscapes. The Stoics understood this metaphor deeply. Power is not always loud. Strength is not always forceful. There is a difference between exhausting struggle and aligned effort. One drains you, the other moves you forward without destroying you. When you are constantly stressed about achieving your goals, you create internal resistance. Your body tightens, your mind narrows. You become so focused on what is missing that you overlook what is already available. Hustle culture convinces you that peace is weakness, but Stoicism teaches the opposite. Peace is power. When you operate from calm clarity instead of fear-driven urgency, your decisions improve, your perception sharpens. You notice opportunities others miss because they are too busy chasing. Anxiety clouds judgment. Desperation distorts perspective. A relaxed mind sees clearly, and clarity is a strategic advantage. This is not about laziness. It is not about surrendering your dreams or lowering your standards. The Stoics were not passive. They acted with discipline and courage. But their action came from inner steadiness, not frantic emotional reaction. Epictetus taught that we control our intentions and efforts, not the outcomes. When you confuse effort with control, you suffer. When you understand that your role is to act wisely and release the result, you regain your strength. Most people are not tired because they are working hard. They are tired because they are fighting reality. They are trying to control timing, other people's reactions, unpredictable outcomes. They are trying to micromanage life itself. And life does not respond well to force. The more you tighten your grip, the more tension you create. The more tension you create, the less open you are to possibility. There is a paradox here that may challenge you. The more desperately you want something, the more you signal that you do not trust its arrival. And that lack of trust drives fearful decisions. Fear leads to overcorrection. Overcorrection leads to burnout. Burnout leads to collapse. The Stoics discovered something different. They learned to pursue excellence without attachment to specific outcomes. They cultivated desire without dependency. They acted with commitment, then stepped back with composure. When you stop fighting the current of life and begin moving with it, something shifts internally. You are no longer operating from scarcity. You are no longer saying, "If this doesn't happen, I am incomplete." Instead, you act from sufficiency. You say, "I will do my part with integrity, and I will trust what follows." That shift from force to flow does not weaken your ambition. It refines it. It purifies it. It makes it sustainable. The lie of hustle says you must constantly prove your worth through effort. Stoicism says your worth is not on trial. The lie of hustle says success belongs to the most frantic. Stoicism says success aligns with those who are disciplined yet detached. The lie of hustle says rest is falling behind. Stoicism says rest sharpens the blade. Before we move deeper into these principles, pause for a moment. Reflect honestly on how you have been pursuing your goals. Are you acting from clarity or from fear? From confidence or from desperation? From grounded discipline or from restless urgency? The difference matters more than you think, because manifestation, achievement, progress, whatever word you prefer, does not respond well to panic. It responds to presence. It responds to steadiness. It responds to inner authority. If you can release the belief that struggle equals success, you open the door to something far more powerful. Effortless action, calm focus, strategic patience. This is where real strength begins, and this is where we continue. Now we move into the paradox that confuses almost everyone. The more desperately you want something, the more it seems to escape you. Not because desire is wrong, but because attachment distorts it. There is a crucial difference between wanting and needing. Wanting is light. Needing is heavy. Wanting allows movement. Needing creates pressure. And pressure quietly repels what ease attracts. Epictetus taught that wealth does not consist in having many possessions, but in having few wants. This was not a rejection of ambition. It was a rejection of emotional dependency. When you make your peace conditional on an outcome, you have surrendered your inner stability to forces outside your control. You are no longer pursuing a goal. You are bargaining with your own sense of worth. And that energy leaks into every decision you make. Detached desire is not indifference. It is clarity without clinging. It sounds like this: I would love for this to happen and I am fully committed to my effort, but I remain whole regardless of the result. That sentence contains freedom, because now your action is not fueled by fear of lack. It is fueled by grounded intention. When you need something to happen, your nervous system tightens. You overanalyze every delay. You interpret neutral events as rejection. You push too hard, speak too quickly, negotiate from insecurity, and often sabotage what could have unfolded naturally. Desperation narrows perception. It blinds you to alternative paths. It convinces you that only one specific outcome will satisfy you. And when reality shifts, you crumble. The Stoics practiced what could be called preferred indifference. They preferred success, health, love, and comfort, but they did not depend on them for their inner equilibrium. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, yet reminded himself daily that external things are neither good nor bad in themselves. It is our judgment that makes them so. When you hold your goals lightly, you remove the emotional charge that distorts your judgment. You begin to operate from steadiness instead of urgency. Think about people who seem magnetic. They are rarely the ones broadcasting their desperation. They are not chasing validation in every conversation. They are not gripping outcomes with white knuckles. They move with quiet confidence. They take action. They speak clearly. But they do not collapse if something does not go their way. That emotional independence is powerful. People trust it. Opportunities respond to it. When you detach from the outcome, you paradoxically increase your effectiveness, because now you are not acting to fill a void. You are acting from fullness. You are not negotiating from scarcity. You are choosing from sufficiency. That shift changes everything. Your posture changes. Your tone changes. Your timing improves. You become patient without becoming passive. Detached desire also expands possibility. When you insist that life must deliver your goal in a specific form, you miss better versions arriving quietly from another direction. The Stoics understood that human perspective is limited. You cannot see the full architecture of events, so they trick themselves to say not just this, but this, or something better. That mindset relaxes your grip without weakening your intention. Practice this deliberately. Hold a goal in your mind. Feel your desire for it. Now soften your body. Release the urgency. Say internally, I will give my best effort and I am open to outcomes beyond my imagination. Notice what happens to your breath. Notice the drop in tension. That space you just created is not weakness. It is alignment. Detached desire allows you to work hard without burning out. to pursue success without losing yourself, to love deeply without becoming dependent. It frees you from emotional volatility tied to external events. You stop measuring your worth by temporary results. You stop interpreting delay as denial. And here is the deeper truth. When you no longer need something to validate you, you become ready to receive it. Because now you can handle it without fear of losing it. You are not clinging, you are capable. That stability is attractive to people, to opportunities, to circumstances. Detached desire is not about lowering ambition. It is about elevating consciousness. It is about acting from calm certainty instead of anxious grasping. When you master this, you stop chasing life, and life begins to move toward you. There is only one place where power actually exists. It is not in tomorrow. It is not in yesterday. It is here. And yet most people live everywhere except here. Their bodies are in the present, but their minds are rehearsing futures that have not happened or replaying pasts that cannot be changed. And then they wonder why nothing seems to move. The Stoics understood something that modern self-help often overcomplicates. All meaningful action, all meaningful perception, all meaningful creation happens in the present moment. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "Constantly confine yourself to the present, not because the future does not matter, but because it cannot be acted upon directly. Only this moment can." When your attention is fragmented, your energy is fragmented. When your mind is split between regret and anticipation, you operate at half capacity. You miss subtle signals. You overlook quiet opportunities. You fail to respond accurately to what is actually happening because you are responding to what you fear might happen. Presence is not just mindfulness. It is power consolidation. It is reclaiming scattered attention and placing it entirely where influence exists. When you are fully present, your perception sharpens. You notice tone shifts in conversations. You sense openings that others overlook. You hear the casual remark that leads to your next opportunity. Think about the most grounded person you know. When they speak to you, they are there. When they work, they are there. They are not glancing at their phone every few seconds. They are not constantly projecting into the next task. That stability is magnetic. It communicates certainty. It communicates depth. It communicates strength. Seneca warned against anxious dependence on the future. Anxiety pretends to be preparation, but it is usually projection without control. You rehearse conversations that never occur. You anticipate rejection that never arrives. Meanwhile, the actual present moment, the only one you can shape, goes unattended. When you practice present moment magnetism, something subtle shifts. You stop chasing potential outcomes and start optimizing actual conditions. You improve the conversation you are currently in. You complete the task in front of you with precision. You strengthen the relationship you are actively building. That consistent presence compounds. There is also an energetic component. When you are truly here, you are not radiating lack. You are not broadcasting tension about what has not yet arrived. You are engaged with what is. And that engagement changes how others experience you. You appear composed. You appear attentive. You appear capable. Opportunities rarely arrive labeled as such. They often arrive disguised as small moments requiring awareness. A brief introduction, a minor decision, a subtle intuition. If your mind is lost in imagined futures, you will not see them. Presence is not passive. It is active attention. The practice is simple but demanding. When you catch your mind drifting into what if or if only, bring it back deliberately. Notice your breath. Notice physical sensation. Ask yourself, what requires my attention right now, not tomorrow, not next month, right now. This does not mean you abandon planning. It means you plan when planning is the present task. And when planning is done, you return to the now. You stop living in the waiting room of your own life. There is another paradox here. When you stop obsessing over the future, you build a better one. Because your decisions improve, your conversations deepen, your performance strengthens. The future is constructed from present actions executed well. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire filled with uncertainty. plagues, wars, betrayal. Yet his writings return repeatedly to the present moment. He knew that if he lost his center in speculation, he would lose clarity in action. Presence is not just peaceful, it is strategic. It prevents wasted energy. It reduces emotional volatility. It sharpens judgment. And when judgment improves, results improve. If you want to become magnetic to opportunity, stop projecting yourself into a version of life that does not yet exist. Anchor yourself where your power actually lives. Here. Because manifestation does not happen in imagination alone. It happens in attention, applied consistently in the present. Most people are not blocked by circumstances. They are blocked by dependence. Dependence on approval. Dependence on outcomes. Dependence on validation. And as long as your emotional state is outsourced to external events, you will never feel powerful no matter how much you achieve. The Stoics drew a sharp line between what belongs to you and what does not. Epictetus taught that no one can harm your inner world unless you allow them to. That statement is not motivational. It is structural. It defines where power actually lives. If your confidence rises and falls with compliments, you are not confident. If your mood depends on numbers in a bank account, you are not stable. If your peace collapses the moment someone disagrees with you, you have handed them authority over your inner state. Inner authority means your emotional baseline is self-governed. It means your sense of worth does not require constant reinforcement. It means you can pursue success without needing it to justify your existence. This does not mean you become indifferent. It means you stop making external results responsible for your internal balance. Notice how much pressure disappears when you operate from this stance. When you no longer need an outcome to feel secure, your decisions improve. You negotiate more calmly. You communicate more clearly. You take risks more intelligently because failure does not threaten your identity. People can sense this. When someone does not need approval, they appear grounded. When someone does not chase validation, they appear confident. When someone does not panic at uncertainty, they appear capable. That perception shifts opportunities because the world responds differently to those who are internally stable. Think of how often you have postponed peace. I'll relax once this works out. I'll feel proud when I reach this milestone. I'll be confident when they recognize me. That pattern creates a permanent delay because there will always be another condition, another benchmark, another external measure. Inner authority collapses that delay. You decide who you are before the results arrive. You decide how you feel before validation appears. You determine your worth without committee approval. Marcus Aurelius ruled the largest empire of his time, yet he constantly reminded himself that his power meant nothing if his mind was disordered. External control without internal control is weakness disguised as dominance. When you reclaim inner authority, you stop negotiating your dignity. You stop shrinking your voice to fit expectations. You stop performing identities to gain acceptance. You begin operating from clarity. And clarity attracts alignment. Because when you know who you are, independent of circumstance, your actions become consistent. Your boundaries become firm. Your energy becomes steady. And steadiness is rare, which makes it powerful. Practice this deliberately, before checking metrics, before seeking feedback, before comparing yourself to anyone else. Ask one question: who do I choose to be regardless of what happens today? That question shifts the axis of your life from reactive to self-directed. The Stoics did not attempt to control the world. They mastered their own responses to it. That mastery created influence without desperation, authority without force. Inner authority is not loud. It is quiet certainty. It is knowing that even if nothing external changes immediately, you remain intact. And when you are intact, you move differently. You speak differently. You decide differently. The world responds to that difference. There is a difference between movement and progress, a difference between effort and alignment. And most people never learn it because they are addicted to motion. They believe if they are not constantly doing, pushing, forcing, they are falling behind. But the Stoics understood something deeper. Not every action is wise. Not every opportunity deserves pursuit. Not every impulse deserves expression. Strategic non-action is not laziness. It is restraint with awareness. It is the discipline to pause when urgency is driven by anxiety rather than clarity. Watch how often action is fueled by fear. Fear of missing out, fear of losing status, fear of being left behind, fear that if you stop pushing, everything will collapse. That fear produces frantic movement, and frantic movement often creates resistance instead of results. Water does not force its path. It adapts, it observes, it waits, then it moves with precision. The Stoics practiced this kind of restraint constantly. Marcus Aurelius led armies, yet he wrote extensively about patience. He understood that reaction wastes energy. Deliberate response multiplies it. Strategic non-action asks a simple question: is this movement aligned or impulsive? When you plant a seed, you do not dig it up every hour to check its progress. You create conditions, then you allow time to perform its function. Manifestation operates similarly. There is a stage of preparation and a stage of patience. Many people sabotage the second stage by interfering with it. They micromanage outcomes, they overcorrect, they exhaust themselves chasing signs of progress. When you have acted with clarity, sometimes the next step is stillness. Stillness is uncomfortable for those who equate busyness with worth. But stillness is where recalibration happens. It is where perspective sharpens. It is where intuitive guidance becomes audible. Consider how often your best decisions emerged not from pressure but from pause, not from frantic brainstorming but from distance. Strategic non-action creates space, and space allows alignment to reveal itself. This does not mean passivity. It means discernment. It means knowing when to push and when to release, when to speak and when to observe, when to advance and when to consolidate. The culture of hustle glorifies constant output. Stoicism honors intelligent restraint. Sometimes the strongest move is silence. Sometimes the smartest strategy is waiting. Sometimes the most powerful action is refusing to react. When you operate from inner authority, you are not pressured by urgency. You can delay gratification. You can let others rush. You can step back without insecurity. And that composure shifts perception. Because people who are not scrambling appear confident. People who are not chasing appear valuable. This principle changes manifestation in a profound way. When you stop interfering with timing, you allow timing to work for you. When you stop forcing doors, you notice the ones already open. The universe does not respond well to desperation. It responds to coherence. Strategic non-action builds coherence. It aligns your energy with patience, not panic. Ask yourself before your next move, is this action necessary, or is it anxiety disguised as productivity? The answer will reveal whether you are aligned or merely restless. Power is not constant motion. Power is controlled motion, and controlled motion requires the courage to stop when stopping is wiser than pushing. Gratitude is not politeness. It is not a personality trait. It is a strategic position of power. Most people wait to feel grateful after they receive what they want. The Stoics reversed that logic. They practiced gratitude before circumstances changed, and in doing so, they changed how circumstances appeared to them. Marcus Aurelius did not wake up in a palace insulated from suffering. He woke up to political betrayal, disease, war, and human imperfection. Yet he trained his mind to begin each day grounded in acceptance rather than complaint. That discipline shaped his perception, and perception shapes experience. When you operate from lack, your focus narrows around what is missing. When you operate from gratitude, your awareness expands toward what is present. Attention is a creative force. What you consistently attend to grows in psychological weight. If you begin each day scanning for deficiency, you reinforce scarcity. If you begin each day identifying sufficiency, you reinforce stability. Gratitude stabilizes your nervous system. It signals safety. It signals abundance. And from safety, wiser decisions emerge. This is not naive optimism. It is disciplined perspective. The Stoics understood that many external events are neutral. Interpretation determines emotional impact. Gratitude is a deliberate interpretation that shifts you from reaction to sovereignty. When you are grateful for what you already have, you stop chasing from emptiness. You begin acting from fullness, and fullness attracts differently than lack. There is also another dimension. Gratitude reduces envy. Envy corrodes clarity. It distracts you from your own path by focusing on someone else's timeline. When you anchor yourself in appreciation, you reclaim focus. You stop measuring your life against external markers. You begin measuring it against alignment with your own values. Gratitude also reframes obstacles. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "What strength is this building in me?" That shift is subtle but transformative, because resistance no longer feels like punishment. It feels like preparation, and preparation cultivates patience. When you close each day by recalling what worked, what you learned, what you endured with dignity, you reinforce identity. You become someone who survives, adapts, and grows. Identity shapes behavior. Behavior shapes outcomes. Gratitude is not passive. It is a decision to recognize existing assets: your breath, your resilience, your relationships, your capacity to think, your ability to act tomorrow. When you internalize sufficiency, desperation fades. And without desperation, clarity sharpens. Clarity invites aligned opportunity. The Stoics practiced negative visualization not to induce fear, but to intensify gratitude. By imagining loss, they strengthened appreciation for presence. When you understand that nothing is guaranteed, everything becomes valuable. And value changes how you move through the world. You become attentive instead of distracted, respectful instead of entitled, grounded instead of restless. Gratitude anchors you in enoughness while still allowing ambition. It creates ambition without agitation. That is a powerful combination, because you pursue growth from stability, not from panic. When gratitude becomes habitual, manifestation becomes a byproduct rather than an obsession. You stop asking life to prove your worth. You start demonstrating worth through awareness, and awareness multiplies what is already working. Practice this deliberately. Identify 3 specific things each day that require no improvement. Let them be complete as they are. This trains the mind to recognize wholeness. And when the mind recognizes wholeness, it stops chasing validation externally. That internal sufficiency is magnetic, because people, opportunities, and growth align more easily with someone who is already grounded rather than grasping. Gratitude is alignment with reality. Alignment reduces friction. Reduced friction increases flow, and flow accelerates progress without strain. The Stoics did not manifest through fantasy. They manifested through clarity. Gratitude sharpens clarity, and clarity builds momentum. If you internalize this, you stop asking when things will change. You begin noticing how much has already changed. That shift alone alters your energy, and energy influences trajectory. Gratitude is not the reward at the end. It is the foundation at the beginning.